China's biggest nightmare the rapid aging of its population or the skidding of its economy? For many years, the country has accumulated wealth as the world's manufacturing workshop, lifting billions of people into middle-income status. But now it is facing what has been dubbed a demographic catastrophe. Its working-age population is shrinking, while the number of elderly is spiraling out of control. Signs such as a huge pension fund deficit, declining growth figures, and young people struggling to find work reveal the depth of the problem. At the same time, the crisis is worsening in an environment where the Chinese people want fewer and fewer children, and the state is not taking calls to have more seriously. For years, the Beijing government implemented A1 child policy, then 2, and now 3. But no one seems to heed the government's call. So how does China, which is expected to shape the future, plan to deal with this internal tension and its rapidly growing population structure? How will social unrest, economic difficulties, and political ambitions affect this picture? According to experts, China's population decline has already begun. Some claim that the country's population peaked as early as 2018 and never even reached 1.3 billion. Official figures put the number at around 1.4 billion, but independent demographers and leaked records suggest that this number is exaggerated and that the country may have fallen behind India even earlier. Yet United Nations data confirms that by 2023, India will be the world's most populous country. China, on the other hand, is rapidly moving towards a fewer and older society. According to forecasts, the population over 60 will reach 520 million in 2050, accounting for around 38% of the total population. Young people will have to shoulder the burden of work and care for aging family members. Such a structure could paralyze the pension system and reduce investment and production capacity. On the street, the tension is palpable. People complain that their salaries have been delayed for months or that house prices have collapsed. On top of that, some factories are laying off workers, making it harder to make ends meet locally. This could spark protests. Party officials are on edge, instructing them to monitor every area, eliminate risks at the grassroots level. Paramilitary forces are patrolling schools, and potential unrest is responded to immediately. In fact, there is anger, perhaps on the verge of a much bigger explosion or possibly contained. Still, the Xi administration has so far managed to prevent mass uprisings. But a deep structural problem like demography cannot be solved by repression alone. Unless economic prosperity grows and the next generation continues to struggle with the threat of unemployment, this unrest could become more serious at any time. Currently, the proportion of the population over the age of 60 in China is over 21%. This equates to 297 million people, and most of these people live in villages or low-income areas and are not entitled to Social Security benefits. In the cities, the pension fund, which is created by deductions from workers' salaries, is already running serious deficits. Municipal and regional governments in particular have limited budgets. While cheap labor and intensive exports were the backbone of China's development model, the aging population and the decline of the young labor force make this model unsustainable. Even though the Beijing administration says we will move to high value-added production and invest in robotization, it is clear that this requires huge investment and time. However, the demographic decline has already begun, so time is working against it. This demographic crisis, coupled with signs of a slowdown in the economy, is further strengthening the tendency among Chinese people to say we want to have fewer children and maintain our living standards. The outrageous housing prices, limited job security, and women's career choices reinforce this picture. In short, the government is saying, have more babies, but people are not in favor of it in the era of the zero COVID policy and the pressures and restrictions it created. Young people have become alienated from the state and are now trying to survive in a system where they cannot find jobs and resources are not distributed equally. This is accompanied by outbursts of anger on social media, occasional protests on the streets, and unrest that could erupt at any moment. The state is closely monitoring the protests and taking measures to quell any mass protest at the outset. Xi Jinping, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, is steering this complex equation. The party wants to prepare for the devastating consequences of the demographic shakeup, but it also wants to increase its influence on the world stage and realize the Chinese dream. In recent years, Beijing has been hearing a lot of talk about the clock is ticking. The window of strategic opportunity is closing. There are concerns that the domestic pressures created by demographics could push China to take a tougher and more aggressive line in the international arena. Some observers believe that the Xi administration may move faster and sharper on Taiwan and may not want to waste time in pushing the US away from East Asia. If population support and economic dynamism are eroding, it may be more difficult to maintain military and political power projection in the future. The risk of social explosions is also increasing accordingly. Although protests in China have always been tightly controlled, especially when it comes to issues such as economic stagnation or non-payment of wages, mass incidents can erupt. There is a fear that the slightest spark can turn into a massive outrage against the authoritarian structure that won't relax. To beef up security, the authorities are deploying paramilitary police to school gates and keeping a close eye on potential unrest in low-income areas. With economic growth slowing, the party's state apparatus will resort to more repression, some experts say. In fact, developments such as the introduction of total surveillance systems and the hardening of digital social credit point to this trend. Taken together, it is clear that it is not easy for China to tackle the so-called demographic catastrophe. In the short term, ideas such as attracting migrants and bringing foreign labor into the system have come to the fore. But it is not clear that China welcomes foreign workers. Increasing nationalist attitudes and skepticism towards foreigners after the pandemic make a major opening in immigration policy impossible, moreover. Why should most people migrate to China when they can move to Europe, the US, or Australia? In terms of income and freedom, China does not look very attractive, so the immigration problem is not a salvation. The move towards robotics and automation and the further sophistication of industrial investments will take time and huge capital. In the meantime, the care of millions of elderly, pensions, and healthcare costs are still on the table. This is precisely why many demographers say China's job is very difficult. They even call it a disaster of their own making. Factors such as the one-child policy, local leaders hiding the truth for too long, welfare policies copied from the West but not fully adapted, and the new generation's hopelessness about the future have all piled up. As a result, the country faces enormous challenges at home and abroad. As Xi Jinping defends the Chinese dream, he may be concerned that the declining aging population will undermine it. Different factions within the party may question Xi's leadership on how successfully he will take measures to address this, and the rest of the world may be right to ask, will slowing growth and turbulent domestic politics push China into a foreign adventure? In short, China is facing the reality of an old, gray, and crumbling population. The population, which it has already announced to be around 1.4 billion, is even expected to fall below 1 billion in the near future. Imagine a Chinese population of around 600 to 700 million by the end of the century. It is a big mystery who will work to sustain its current formidable economy and who will fill its tax base. This transformation will affect the global balance of power as much as Chinese domestic politics. Will it be an aging China or a China that tries to manage this process with technological moves and external aggression? Time will tell. What do you think? Is it possible for China to overcome this so-called demographic catastrophe, or is it too late? The one-child policy was perhaps the greatest social engineering experiment of the 20th century, and now they are paying the price. Share your ideas in the comments and let's discuss. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like this video.